Hello, thanks for joining Elisa and Patrick Arundell for the Astrology and Spirituality Weekly Show for week commencing the 31st of May. So as we make the transition from May into lovely June, Elisa, what's the Hermetic Wheel got in store for us this week?
Well, this week we move into, again, a bit of a tricky card. Last week we had the Eight of Swords energy. This week we move into the Nine of Swords. So it's still difficult in some respects. This tarot card can be called the Lord of Despair in some decks. It can mean that we're suffering from nightmares or having some sort of insomnia. It really is a card of worry and maybe thinking that things aren't going right. But the silver lining is that the number 9 is the number of completion. So the worst is kind of over when this card appears. We just got to get through maybe a few little obstacles.
Is this anything to do with buying and selling houses by any chance?
It could do. It could be. But I think a lot of us can experience this Nine of Swords energy where it's like that worry, anxiety creeps in, or we're overthinking things like, oh, did I turn the lights off downstairs?
And COVID obviously has created a lot of stresses and strains.
Yes.
Other than the stresses and strains that life throws up anyway.
Yeah, so it can just be a card that sort of, if we pull this for ourselves in a reading, it's kind of reflecting back to us that in some aspect of our life we're overwhelmed. But like we said, that 9 is completion, so it's nearly to the end of that cycle when we can move back into that Ace of Swords energy, which is about inspiration and getting things done.
But the Swords is about thought, isn't it?
Yes.
And because we've got the Sun in Gemini, the sign of everyday thinking, and we have Mercury, the planet which governs the sign of Gemini, also in Gemini, along with Venus and the North Node at the start of this week, there is a lot of opportunities to think, but because of Mercury's retrograde and its tangle with Neptune, the planet of dreams, perhaps that's feeding into this potential to kind of feel a bit overwhelmed, feel a bit physically drained, because Mercury rules the nervous system. And the watery energy of Neptune in its 90-degree right angle is, if you like, diminuting the clarity that we like to gain from Mercury in Gemini. And obviously the retrograde itself can also be challenging. But you like to use a series of adjectives to think about Mercury retrograde more positively.
Yeah, and it's funny because some of those words did come up for us, words that you suggested. So one of those words was reflection, reflexology. Anything that begins with an RE. Rewind, relax, rejuvenate.
Recalibrate,
revisit, redecorate. Mercury retrograde is a great time to either go back to something that we started and then never finished. It's a good time to get that done, to reflect on it. So yes, people might say, well, it's not a great time to start something new, but it is a good time to finish some stuff off. So tying up those loose ends in Mercury retrograde, giving ourselves that time to relax, having that reflexology treatment, all brilliant things to do. And in fact, they're heightened in Mercury in retrograde, that it's the best time to do them.
That's fabulous. And also the Sun in Gemini is actually forging a very stable and constructive link to Saturn, the planet of structures, also in an air sign of Aquarius. And even though Saturn is itself in retrograde now, I think as long as we really concentrate on the details and the things that we can alter and take the steps in a very precise way to change things, and try not to get too caught up in those sort of periphery energies that could drain us or distract us, we can actually make real progress this week. And also, on Tuesday, Venus moves out of Gemini and into the lovely Cancer. So Venus in Cancer is a wonderful time to think about doing anything with our outdoor space. So if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, anything to do with tending to window boxes, or perhaps spending time in a garden if you have one. If not, spending time in the local park or going to somewhere of a place of natural beauty, for example, a river or a lake or the sea. Now, this week does, however, see a very powerful opposition between Mars and Pluto. Mars in the sign of Cancer, where it's not at its best really, it's in its full. And I think Mars opposite Pluto can give people a lot of endurance. So if you are someone who wants to, leap off the settee after the restrictions of COVID and be much more active, this can see us setting our sights quite high in terms of being determined to go beyond just taking it so easy, and really, setting our sights high in that regard. But also Mars opposite Pluto, two rulers of Scorpio, can make people a little bit bloody-minded. Across the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, they're both cardinal leader signs. Cancer's about emotion, so Mars in Cancer can make people more emotional and defensive. And Pluto in Capricorn can make people a bit too focused on the material plane. So I think if any frustrations come up this week, it could be difficult to not let these come into the open. So I think the pragmatism of the Sun's trine with Saturn just asks us to take it all back to what we can influence in a bit by bit, stage by stage way, and that will give us a sense of feeling that we can push back against the murky angle of Mercury retrograde square Neptune, and also in some ways fend off the tendency to get over frustrated with Mars opposite Pluto. Now, we have had a winner of the birthday analysis free prize draw. We've had absolutely loads of people entering their birth details for me to have a look at. What we want to do is keep it to the week that we're working in. So next week will be week commencing the 7th of June. So if your birthday is from the 7th through to the 13th of June, please feel very welcome to enter your details. However, if you want a free natal birth chart, all you need to do is click on the link beneath this video and you can get my free natal birth chart analysis. It's brilliant. It will give you all the positions in your chart when you were born, help you to understand more about the relationship between different planets, because all the aspects are outlined there for you, and that's totally free. So please see the link beneath this video. Also, I must stress, if you'd like to get your free daily horoscope pinged directly to your device each morning, again, please see the link beneath this video. And just on this note of telling you about information, please feel very welcome to subscribe. So the more people that subscribes, the more that sends a signal to YouTube, the more they share our videos. So we'd be immensely grateful if you did subscribe and like this video. Now, the person that's won the prize draw is from London, and his name is Mr. Alexander. We don't have a Christian name, a first name I should say, but his birthday is the 5th of June 1991. So we're talking about on the last next Saturday. I think we're talking about Saturday at the end of this week. Born in London. And the interesting thing about this chart is the ascendant is at 2 degrees 39 in Aquarius. So that means in the Dward system of the 12th harmonic, the ascendant is also governed doubly by Aquarius. So that's a very Aquarius ascendant, but also the co-ruler of Aquarius, Saturn, is right on that ascendant. So Mr. Alexander, I think you may have been a person that has had to work quite hard in developing your identity, and also your physical vitality at times may get challenged a little bit by that Saturn position at 6 degrees. But the interesting thing, on the other side of the heavens, directly opposite Saturn, is Mars. So you have Saturn opposite Mars, but you also have Saturn opposite Jupiter. So Mars is on the 7th house cusp, the descendant, along with Jupiter, which is a little bit further away. And then in the 6th house, you have Venus in Cancer, which is what is happening this week. So you have a lot of energy around the relating part of your situation, and also the ascendant, which is your body, the way you assimilate ideas, how people view you. So people may view you as being a little cool and a little detached. You also have Juno, the asteroid of relating, at 1 degrees, exactly 1 degrees in Aquarius, but in the 12th house. So there's a part of you that I think has an ability to be quite rational in how you view things. But when it comes to relationships, I think once you're really engaged by something, even though you might run a little bit on the shy side to begin with, once you're really engaged in a relationship, I think it's going to be something that really gives you a sense of excitement. And your midpoint is at 24 degrees Aries. So the midpoint between your moon, which is at 5 degrees Pisces, and the sun, which is at 13 degrees in Gemini in the 4th house. So home, emotion, family, all are very important to you. The midpoint's 24 degrees in Aries. So I would speculate that the last couple of years have been a bit challenging for you as the pack of planets went through Capricorn, which for you was in your 12th solar house. So a very psychological area, clashing with your midpoint in the 2nd house of resources. So feeling secure about resources is important to you. And I just feel that you've also gone through your Saturn return, and you're going to go through another phase of that when Saturn gets to the end of its retrograde this autumn in the northern hemisphere. So you're not quite out of your first Saturn return. So Saturn returns, if we're lucky enough, we have 3 in our lives. For most people it will be 2, but pretty well everyone has that first one, which is around about 28 to 30 and a half, depending on exactly where Saturn is. Your Saturn's at 6 degrees in Aquarius. So Saturn's moved beyond your actual nativity Saturn location, but now it's in retrograde, it will get back to there. So that means you're going to have a second pass. So this is asking you to think about the things that you identify with, the things that define you as an individual. You may have to strip down elements of your life, make them more simple, and really decide where your priorities lie. Fortunately for you, however, Jupiter at the moment and through to the 28th of July is very, very close to your natal moon, and that's giving you some support to develop your awareness to who you are as an individual. But you're really going to get the benefit of Jupiter in Pisces next year, because it will more closely connect with your moon, but it will then go on to forge some fabulous angles. Well, it will forge a fabulous angle to a number of positions in your chart, and I think next year will be a lighter year for you. So this year is providing some challenges, and I think even around your relationship situation, as you go into the autumn, you may have to sort of think about exactly what you want, but I feel that you're someone who will find over time that a relationship will come into your life that will be very, very important to you. I think it will be a relationship that defines your whole existence. But there is a deeper side to your nature with Neptune and also the North Node in your 12th house. And I hope that gives you some understanding of your situation. So if your birthday, someone else, is from week commencing the 7th to the 13th of June, please pop your details, time, date, place of birth, and where you're located now on YouTube. You don't have to put anything too confidential. And if you'd rather just write to me, just say, please write to give me the details, and I'll just reply to you on YouTube with the email address. So, what about the modality of this week, Elisa? What cards are you going for?
Well, this week I thought we would go for something a little bit fiery. And so therefore we're using the Dragon Path Oracle cards. I love these. They're all about dragons and they're very, fantastical. So give these a little shuffle for the week and see what comes up.
And there's not many of these cards, by the way.
No, there isn't. It's a bit of a skinnier.
I suppose there's not many dragons left in the world these days.
Okay, so this is really cute. So there's a little dragon here, and he's like on a tree, and he's very sweet. And the words on this card are the healer. And he's this beautiful sort of emerald green colour as well, which is very much a colour associated with healing, associated with the Archangel Raphael, which is the Archangel of healing. So this idea of the healer, I think it kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the video, with things beginning with RE, relax, refresh, retreat, giving ourselves some time to heal. And I think that this Mercury in retrograde would be a good time to do that, because we can get frustrated with it, can't we? Because it can sometimes cause a bit of mischief in us moving forwards, whether this be traffic, whether this be contracts, or whatever it is.
Piece of technology goes on the brink.
And that frustration can bubble up in us all. But if we think, okay, that could be a possibility, it's not saying for definite, but it's a possibility. So therefore, actually, we're going to spend more time on our inner healing and things that we can do for ourselves that we do have control over. So I think that is just a little reminder this week to kind of try not to sweat the small stuff. I say that to myself as much as anybody else. And I do have my Mars opposite Pluto in my natal chart. So it was funny when you were talking about that. I was thinking about that.
Yeah. You certainly have Moon opposite Mars, and you also have a Moon opposite Pluto. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You have Mars and Pluto in Scorpio in the same sign, the fifth house, which is very passionate, which is lovely. And they're also, obviously, because they're the rulers of Scorpio, for you they're at home. So, passion is something that comes very naturally to you. Now, we also had a question come in this week about different types of tarot.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you, Nick. So you wrote in and asked, what are the sort of different types of tarot and astrology? Now, from a tarot perspective, if we go back to the 1400s, this is where the first sort of record of tarot came. A tarot deck was gifted to the Visconti family, who were a very prominent, powerful family in Milan. And they were used as kind of playing cards, so not so much for divination. It wasn't until the 1700s that these cards were used for divination by French occultists. And then in 1910, Rider-Waite released a deck, which is really popular still today. And that really was the boom in using tarot cards for divination. And then from the 70s sort of onwards, there are absolutely hundreds of tarot decks now. In terms of how they can be used, tarot decks, unlike oracle decks, have one meaning really, or maybe a couple of meanings to them. And the reason I love working with tarot, it's kind of like a story. So each card has a meaning. So when you pull that card, you know exactly, what that card's trying to tell you. It's not massively open to interpretation. It is what it is. But in saying that, even though there's only kind of one type of tarot, if you like, there are many different spreads that we can use. We can use tarot spreads for relationship readings, for career, for our life purpose, for our year ahead. The kind of two tarot spreads that I like to use, or we like to use together, are the Celtic Cross, which is a 10-card spread that talks about your past, your present situation, a little bit what's going on for you spiritually and in your thoughts, and then some outcomes. And then for a quick reading, you can have that 3-card spread, which looks at your past, present, and future, which is a really great one if we just kind of want a quick look into our situation. And saying that, you can always get your free 3-card spread from our site with the link beneath the video. But so that's kind of the different types of tarot.
Yeah, I think you've explained that really well, because it's such a massive subject. Yeah. And there's also, is it Lenormand?
Yeah, Lenormand cards.
Lenormand,
so
sorry.
I really love Lenormand cards. I'm not a Lenormand expert, and I don't read them that much myself, because that is still a tool of divination that I'm learning, and obviously all these tools take lifetimes to learn. But what I have found from Lenormand decks is they're very different to tarot in terms of the meanings of the cards. The spreads look very, very different. I mean, you read Lenormand diagonally and vertically and horizontally, so...
There's also less cards, isn't there?
There's less cards, but what I do love about them, it's very much like, it reminds me of kind of a storybook cards. I had this game as a kid where you would pull a card and it had like a picture on it, and then another card had another picture, and you kind of had to make a story of it. And that's, to me, a little bit how Lenormand works. If you asked a question like, what's my career prospects, and you pulled, I don't know, the egg and the key, you'd be thinking, well, that's actually very, very fortunate. If you pulled like an egg and a snake, well, snakes generally mean like maybe a woman who's a little bit deceitful in life. So someone could be after your job in that case. So they're quite direct, they're quite blunt, but another useful tool, definitely.
Yeah, it's a massive subject. But thank you very much for asking that question, Nick. And you obviously asked about different forms of astrology. So obviously the standout question really is the difference between Western and Vedic astrology. And Vedic astrology takes into account the wobble on the Earth's axis and therefore the precession of the equinoxes. So, for example, it's about a 24-degree gap. So, Western astrology is based absolutely on the seasons. And we have the 4 points of the season are the Earth points, which starts off with the vernal equinox at 0 degrees Aries. We have the summer solstice, 0 degrees Cancer. Then we have the autumn equinox, 0 degrees Libra, and then the winter solstice, 0 degrees Capricorn. So we have 4 cardinal quadrants, and those are fixed. So when the Western tropical zodiac was envisioned, that was what was pretty well above us in the sky. But of course, knockers of Western tropical astrology say, well, it doesn't take into account that all the changes that have gone on in terms of the way we view the sky from the Earth, but it was always only symbolic, and it's very much based on those 12 divisions of 30 degrees and those 4 quadrants, so it is fixed, if you like, whereas Vedic takes into account that precession, but there has been some analysis on the accuracy of the two systems, and some people who are quite sceptical about Western tropical astrology may be quite surprised that it does come out in some very good tests that have been conducted. Western tropical astrology for accuracy does generally score higher than Vedic astrology. Now, within Western tropical astrology, there is traditional astrology, which doesn't take into account the newly discovered planets over the last few hundred years. It is just simply the sun and the moon, which are not actually seen as planets. Of course, they will never retrograde. They're seen as luminaries. And then we have, obviously, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Saturn. So those were the traditional planets. Whereas modern astrology takes into account Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And yes, us astrologers absolutely believe that Pluto is a planet. And anyway, if I changed my name to Deirdre and I was talking about astrology, I would still be telling you the same things. So whether we say it's a planet or not, I can assure you its influence is manifest. So within traditional astrology, there is a form of divination called horary. And that's where we ask a question, and on the basis of when that question is asked, the astrologer will run some tests to give a percentage likelihood of whether the querent's query is going to work out for them in the way that they ask or not. But it is a percentage. And it does take into account God, if you like. And I'm actually going to be doing a course from next January on horary with the School of Traditional Astrology, which is a very esteemed organisation. And if you want to apply to their courses, just search for the School of Traditional Astrology. And the principal is someone called Deborah Holden, who has a really outstanding reputation. But modern astrology is more based on the concept of the planets are in movement above us, and they do provide influence. But what we do, and it's just as true as traditional astrology as well, we totally have free will. But what we do, modern astrology is more based on giving ourselves some information to make our decisions. So it's less fatalistic. But those are the areas that I think you could say break down in simple terms. There's lots of other things. You can have things like perfections where you have life years. So for example, I'm going through a 4th life year at the moment. Guess what? I have a load of planets in the 4th house. including the moon, and we have Saturn sat on top of my moon. So what am I doing? I'm moving home. Now, from my birthday next January, it will be my 5th profected year, which is very much about joys, pleasures, children. So let's see what comes from that. So that's another form of, and of course we have Chinese astrology, which is much more based on the lunar calendar as well. So there are lots of different systems, Nick. And of course, in terms of YouTube astrology, most YouTube astrologers use the sun as the first house, so the point of the first house, but they don't use the person's sun wherever it is within a zodiac sign. They use the first point of that zodiac sign. So for example, Mr. Alexander, we've just been discussing, his sun is at 13 degrees Gemini, but if he's watching a Gemini video on YouTube, one of mine or anyone else's, I'll be looking at it from 0 degrees Gemini in terms of the overview I give. So it is very broad based, and it can only give a flavour. And it is natal astrology, where we're really looking at someone's time, date and place of birth. So if you don't know your natal chart, please click on that link below and get it for free. And that is what really is so special. So we can see with Mr. Alexander, he may be a Gemini, but he's actually got an ascendant in Aquarius, very close to Saturn. So it's a very serious ascendant, but he's also got that Jupiter and Mars conjunction in the very proud Leo in the 7th house of relating. So when we're talking about what video for him to watch, we've got a few options there. It could be Gemini, it could be Aquarius with the ascendant. And there's no golden rule. Sometimes people ask, well, should I watch my ascendant on my sun? It's not really a perfect system, to be honest. It is serious astrology, which we should all be investigating as much as we can. Now, the other question we had is what happens if you're born on a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, and how does that play out in your life? Well, it's a brilliant question. Certainly if you're born on a lunar eclipse or you're born on a full moon, it always means that there's an opposition between the moon, which is the receptive energies we have, and the sun, which is the more go-getting, energy-centered energies we have, the self, the ego, and therefore they're always competing through your whole life. So that's going to be more difficult to balance. If you're lucky enough to be born on a solar eclipse, like we got married on a solar eclipse, and an astrologer I know said, I can't believe you got married on a solar eclipse. Well, what a crazy thing to do, which I thought was actually quite rude, but hey, everyone's entitled to an opinion. I didn't take it personally, but the key is a solar eclipse is where the moon is right at the center of the sun, so it's amplified. So depending on what zodiac sign the solar eclipse occurs in, if someone is born there, so if it's based in Leo, obviously the sun's very strong in Leo, the moon's less strong. If the sun moon conjunction is in Capricorn, the moon's in detriment in Capricorn, but the sun is fine in Capricorn. So we have to drill down, and then we'd have to see what houses they were in. So for example, the solar eclipse could be in Capricorn, conjunct the moon in its detriment, but actually if they're in the 12th house, that's going to be way more complicated and complex than, say, someone who's got it in the 5th house, which reinforces the energy of the sun. If it was the 4th house, that would reinforce the energy of the moon. So all these different pieces of data, astrologers are computating literally within seconds of getting a wheel up on screen and answering a question. So it is very complex. So I would say that if you are born on a lunar eclipse or a full moon or a quarter moon, that pattern does keep getting repeated in your life. But if you're lucky enough to be born on a new moon or a solar eclipse, depending on which signs involved and which house system and which aspects to that position are forged. So for example, you could have Saturn right by them. So that would make even the most glorious conjunction between the sun and the moon, saying Leo, in the 5th house, fabulous, put Saturn there, you change it straight away. So there's so many different calibrations, it's very difficult to come out with one overarching opinion that would suit everybody's circumstances. It's in fact impossible. So
So thank you so much for writing your questions in, and we do enjoy looking over them.
yeah, please
So
send in more questions,
please
more
do.
words of the week, and your birthday for week commencing the 7th through to the 13th, if you'd like us to have a look at that.
Yes.
And for now, from the A team, it is...
Goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from her.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.